The War of the Rohirrim should have been an easy win. You've got Middle-earth, one of the richest fantasy worlds ever created, and a story about Helm Hammerhand, a legendary king whose fists are the stuff of myth. Throw in some anime flair, Peter Jackson's blessing, one of the original screenwriters for the Jackson Lord of the Rings movies, and it all sounds like a recipe for greatness. But when Eowyn, as narrator, tells us about her protagonist Hera in the opening sequence and states, "Don't look for tales of her in the old songs, there aren't any," you can hear the alarm bells ringing.
Rohan still needs you.
No, Hera. They need you. You must lead them now.
For those unfamiliar with the source material, Helm Hammerhand's story is rooted in Appendix A of The Lord of the Rings. It's a grim tale of survival, vengeance, and sacrifice that plays out during one of Rohan's darkest hours. The movie attempts to adapt this, but it takes liberties that'll leave Tolkien purists scratching their heads. While the core events, Helm's defiance, the Long Winter, and the titular war, remain intact, the movie adds new characters, changes motivations, sidelines important characters from the lore in favor of the new character, Hera, and cranks up the melodrama. It's not so much a tale of Helm Hammerhand, so much a tale of Hera and how she experienced and influenced the events from the story. In the lore, Helm is a solitary, almost mythical figure who endures incredible hardships to protect his people, even at the cost of his own life. The movie, however, tries to turn him into a more conventional action hero, complete with dramatic monologues and exaggerated fight scenes. It's entertaining, sure, but it misses the tragic nobility that defines Helm in Tolkien's writings. And Hera, who was never named in the lore but was mentioned as a daughter of Helm regarding a marriage proposal, feels largely ineffectual for most of the film as she attempts to steer the events away from tragedy and fails, until the end when she turns into a full on warrior maiden, resolving conflicts through brawn when she had previously been using her brains to deal with difficult or dangerous situations. Let's talk animation. The battles are as intense as you'd hope, with Rohan's riders charging into combat in scenes that feel ripped from Helm's saga. The action is decent and feels savage, though you can't help but notice the PG rating, as the camera always cuts away just as the sword's about to land. This is no Ninja Scroll or Gantz. All in all, though, it's serviceable and at times exciting. The characters are generally well animated, but there's some jankiness to them. I stayed for the credits and I saw, I don't know, about 15 or more animation studios that worked on this movie, so that's probably part of the issue. There's this weird discordance between the background art and the foreground characters, horses, oliphants, etc. Basically, anything that moves. The credits show different units responsible for the background art and other art assets. And maybe that's how it usually is in productions like this, but I don't think these teams were on the same page. The unit that did the background art nailed it out of the park. The backgrounds are detailed and complex, heavily textured and shadowed, and look realistic and lived in. The characters in foreground art, on the other hand, look flat, with very little detail or texture on hair, beards, armor, or clothing. All the colors on clothing are flat with minimal shadowing. The result is this weird popping effect where the backgrounds and characters look so different that it seems like the people are standing in front of a green screened backdrop. I know this is common in a lot of animation, but it stuck out more for me here. There's little to no blending of the animation into one style, like in something like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, or any Studio Ghibli movie. Another thing that messed with my head was the anime style itself, paired with the rousing songs from Middle Earth or breathy narrations of epic fantasy deeds. It didn't really work for me. I like Record of Lodoss War and Berserk a lot, so I'm not opposed to Western fantasy done in an anime style, but for Lord of the Rings it felt off. I think Ralph Bakshi's unique take felt more appropriate than what we're presented with here. Tolkien's world is rich, with detail and subtlety, qualities that don't always mesh with the bold, dramatic style of anime. Some scenes, like the battles, benefit from the heightened intensity, but others feel out of place. For example, Tolkien's stories are known for their restrained emotional beats, where characters' feelings are conveyed through actions and subtext. This movie, however, leans heavily on melodrama, with Hera and Wolf frequently delivering over the top speeches that would make Elrond cringe. Instead of delivering something bold and unique, the film settles for mediocrity. If you were hoping for the artistic brilliance of Spirited Away or the emotional depth of The Wings of Oniames, you're out of luck. This feels more like a discounted version of those anime classics. Which brings us to the characters. Hama and Haleth, Hera's brothers, are sidelined in favor of Hera's perspective. The lore is twisted to get them out of the picture and leave Hera alone to solve the crisis. Actually, that happens to pretty much everyone in the movie. Freyalaf, her cousin, is absent for most of the runtime, and the legendary Helm Hammerhand, who probably should have been the main character and who I liked the most, is hardly there, except for some over exaggerated action sequences. While Tolkien's Helm is a stoic and tragic figure, the film doesn't delve deeply enough into his inner turmoil, leaving him feeling like a side character in his own story. His last stand against Wolf's Dunlendings in the freezing cold before the gates of the Hornburg isn't even shown, not to a satisfactory extent. Never mind that because of the way it's portrayed in the movie, you'll wonder why the Rohan soldiers didn't just open the gates and rally around him, or let him in. Hera is not in Tolkien's original text, aside from a mention, which should be warning enough for anyone familiar with the Rings of Power and the liberty that show took with Tolkien's writings. She's not all bad, though. Certainly better than Rings of Power's Galadriel.
You wish to heal Middle Earth. Heal yourself.
At first, she's portrayed realistically, solving combat situations with cleverness and resourcefulness rather than brute strength. It's believable. She lures a rampaging Oliphant to its death at the hands of a watcher in the water in a clever way, and uses the tools available to her during the attack on Edoras, rather than girl boss her way through everything like Galadriel would. Her determination to protect her people and step out of her father's shadow gives the movie its heart, and she does have some roundness to her character. But even here, the film stumbles. Hera's struggle to balance duty and personal loss is compelling, but it's undercut by the movie's tendency to oversimplify conflicts. And at some point past the midway mark, she's killing an ice troll and owning the villain while pulling off acrobatic moves, the likes of which maybe only Legolas would be capable of, and she certainly wasn't shown to be capable of anything of the sort until this point. Just to drive the point home, there's almost a recreation of the ice climbing scene in Rings of Power. Like, was that intentional? It's an obvious 180 from resourceful intelligence to straight up Hera warrior princess, so she can own the incel who's mad she didn't marry him, and who wants revenge for his father's death. Speaking of which, Wolf, while an occasionally fun antagonist to watch, is probably the film's weakest link. In Tolkien's lore, his grievances against Rohan stem from his family's disposition and a long standing feud with Helm's Line. Tolkien's version of Wolf is a bitter, vengeful man driven by familial hatred and political ambition. The movie's Wolf? He's an over the top caricature, stomping around like a cartoon baddie whose only goal is to set things on fire. It's a missed opportunity to explore the political and personal stakes that made Tolkien's version of the story compelling. War of the Rohirrim is a strange one. I liked the first half and was really getting into it. And then around the halfway mark, the movie jumps the shark. There's some really preposterous bullshit that took me right out of it. Tonally, the first half is a believable portrayal of a point in time in Middle Earth, with all the seriousness and danger that entails. Whereas the second half felt like Commando with a little Dragon Ball mixed in, which sounds awesome, but doesn't really fit in a Tolkienian environment. Characters behave differently than before, and what feels like a realistic take on a long and drawn out siege becomes another ridiculous action set piece, with engineering nightmares akin to the siege engines in Rings of Power. It was going so well, and then things flipped. Hard. In the end, The War of the Rohirrim is a serviceable fantasy adventure with some standout moments, but it lacks the depth and authenticity that make Tolkien's stories timeless. For Tolkien purists, the deviations from the lore might be frustrating. For casual fans, the movie might feel like a middling anime adaptation with some cool battles and a lot of missed potential. So what's the verdict? The War of the Rohirrim isn't a total train wreck, but it's far from the masterpiece it could have been. There are flashes of brilliance, like with Helm or the battle sequences, but they're buried under inconsistent animation, a thin plot, and a villain who feels like he escaped from a Saturday morning cartoon. Is it worth watching? If you're a diehard Tolkien fan, sure. You might find enough to enjoy, especially if you keep your expectations in check. But if you're looking for something that captures the magic of Middle Earth or the artistry of top-tier anime, you might be better off rewatching The Lord of the Rings or binging Attack on Titan. The first half is good, but the last half is infuriating and missed the mark for me. So average it out and you get a 5 out of 10. I know that's not the way it works, but yeah, this is an average animated flick and it kind of feels like what it is, a rights retainer for Warner Brothers, so Amazon can't snap up the movie licensing and defile it like it did to the appendices. The film doesn't hit the heights of Tolkien's work, but it doesn't hit the dank depths of Rings of Power either. Anyway, what do you think? Did the War of the Rohirrim honor Tolkien's legacy, or is it just another cash grab riding on Middle Earth's name? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.
What does Mordor want with rings, anyway?
Hey, the less I know, the better.